Good evening. I'm Lester Holt in for Brian. The White House tonight says there's no question they did it, calling out the Syrian government over a chemical weapons attack last week that killed hundreds of Syrian civilians. The language from Washington today was exceedingly blunt. Secretary of State John Kerry this afternoon laying out the case for a likely U.S. military response.
The killing of women and children and innocent bystanders by chemical weapons is a moral obscenity. By any standard, it is inexcusable, and despite the excuses and equivocations that some have manufactured, it is undeniable.
Tonight, the White House is gathering international backing for possible airstrikes against Syria, while UN chemical weapons inspectors have finally been allowed into ground zero of last week's attack. NBC's Richard Engel made it into Syria today. He's now safely back on the Turkish side of the border with a lot more on today's fast-moving developments. Richard, good evening.
Good evening, Lester. Some Western officials believe that President Bashar al-Assad personally ordered the use of chemical weapons. Tonight, the White House says no final decision has been made about any U.S. military action.
UN inspectors today in Damascus. One of their vehicles shot by a sniper. But after a brief delay, they finally began their work, interviewing survivors, doctors, and taking samples. But this may already be a sideshow. The U.S. and others already believe the Assad regime used chemical weapons last week on a scale not seen anywhere in decades. So America is once again building a case for military action.
There must be accountability for those who would use the world's most heinous weapons.
The likely action? Cruise missile strikes from 4 U.S. Navy destroyers and 2 submarines already in the Mediterranean. Possible targets? Syrian military facilities and weapon systems, planes and airfields, command and control bunkers. But not, U.S. officials say, President Assad himself. And not chemical weapon stockpiles. Too risky. Would it be legal? UN backing is unlikely without Russian support, but a coalition of Arab and European states, along with the U.S., could be used to justify a strike. We traveled to northern Syria today with U.S.-backed rebels.
Syrians tell us the United States has an enormous responsibility now. Yes, this isn't America's war, and no, these people here don't want American troops and for this to become another Iraq. But they say if the United States doesn't intervene now, Bashar al-Assad's regime will only be encouraged to go further, and they believe use chemical weapons again.
Osama Mawas arrived at a camp with his wife and 11 children today. Osama told us he came to hide from the poison gas and didn't know where else to go. It's a dirty regime, he said. But the most powerful words came from 10-year-old Sidra, a message she said she had for President Obama. Does he want his kids to be like us? Aren't we just like them? When we get bigger, we're going to write Obama didn't help us, she said. But Secretary Kerry made it clear today the U.S. wants to help and is preparing to act.
The images of entire families dead in their beds, human suffering that we can never ignore or forget. Anyone who could claim that an attack of this staggering scale could be contrived or fabricated needs to check their conscience and their own moral compass.
The Syrian regime denies that it ever used chemical weapons. Syrian rebels tell us that Bashar al-Assad has used them at least 30 times since this war began, and that this latest case was just the most flagrant. Lester?
Richard Engel in Turkey tonight. Thanks.